My name's Jessica. I'm 45 years old, working as a psychologist at a small clinic tucked away in the suburbs. My days follow the same old routine, with nothing particularly exciting to look forward to. Starting with my morning coffee, seeing patients one after the other, having lunch alone, and then diving back into work before finally heading home. My husband, Mike, is a civil engineer, and just like my life, our relationship lost its spark ages ago. We've been married for 20 years, but with every year that goes by, I feel us drifting further apart. Our kids grew up and moved away long ago, leaving our house feeling way too big and painfully empty. There was a time when I found genuine joy in connecting with my patients, where I felt like I was making a difference, but now my job has become nothing more than a monotonous cycle. Same problems, same advice, over and over again. I'm exhausted by the endless repetition, yet I don't see a way out. Most evenings I find myself sitting by the window, staring out at the same old streets of our suburb, where nothing has changed in years, feeling life slipping through my fingers. When Mike comes home from work, he sits down for dinner without a word, turns on the TV, and we eat in silence. Sometimes it feels like we're just two strangers sharing a roof but living completely separate lives. I often find myself thinking about my younger days, when I was just starting out, brimming with ambition and dreams of changing the world. Back then, I was convinced I could help people, that my work really mattered. But now I'm not so sure anymore. It feels like I've lost myself somewhere in the maze of compromises I've made along the way. One evening after getting home from work, I found Mike already there, sitting in the living room, flipping through a newspaper. I wandered into the kitchen, turned on the kettle out of sheer habit, and started wondering how we ended up like this. My job, my marriage, everything had turned into a routine I couldn't break free from. Each day plays out like clockwork. I don't dream anymore, I don't make plans. My life has become a series of dull days that blend together in a never-ending loop. I can't even remember the last time I felt genuinely happy or excited about anything. And even though I know I'm stuck in a rut, I have no idea how to change it. It's like I'm trapped in a web spun from my own fears and doubts. Deep down, there's a tiny spark that wants to change things, but I'm scared it might be too late. A few days later, just when I was about to accept that my life would be forever stuck in this routine, something unexpected happened. That evening, I came home as usual, completely drained after another day of dull consultations. Mike was already there, busy with his own things, and as usual, we exchanged the same old small talk. I walked into the kitchen, and there on the table amidst the mail and bills, I spotted an envelope with the logo of the university where I studied years ago. For a moment I just stood there, unable to believe my eyes. When I finally picked up the envelope, I felt a small thrill. Something I hadn't felt in ages. Inside was an invitation to give a lecture to the psychology students. They wanted me, one of their alumni, to share my experiences with the current students. A rush of emotion surged through me. Excitement, fear, and an unexpected joy all mixed together. I couldn't remember the last time something had stirred me like this, and it wasn't just about professional recognition. It was a chance to feel truly alive again. Mike noticed me standing there with the envelope in my hands and asked what it was all about. I told him about the invitation, but he just nodded, not paying it much mind. To him, it was just another thing on my never-ending to-do list, but to me it felt like so much more. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming lecture. There was a time when I dreamed of speaking to large audiences, inspiring people, and sharing my knowledge. And even though that enthusiasm had faded over the years, this invitation suddenly felt like it could be the very thing to pull me out of the rut I'd been stuck in for so long. The next day I sent my acceptance. My heart was pounding a little faster than usual, and my mind was already racing with ideas about what I'd say to the students. I started gathering materials, digging up old notes from my lectures, and reminiscing about the times when I genuinely felt like I was making a difference. Deep down, I hoped that this experience would not only help me rediscover the joy in my work, but also help me reclaim that part of myself that had been lost along the way. The day of the lecture finally arrived. I put on a formal business suit, trying to bolster my confidence, and made my way to the university. The drive, familiar, yet somehow different, brought back a flood of memories from my student days, when life was brimming with possibilities and new discoveries. When I arrived on campus, I was greeted by a student who had been assigned as my assistant for the day. His name was Alex, young, full of energy and enthusiasm, He immediately caught my attention. Alex was a second-year psychology student, and in his eyes I saw that same spark that I used to have. "Welcome back to the university, Jessica," he said with a big smile. "We're really excited that you agreed to give the lecture." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I felt my nerves begin to settle. As we walked around the campus, Alex shared his interests, why he chose to study psychology, his dreams, and his ambitions. As I listened to him, something inside me began to stir. He reminded me of those days when I was filled with hope and a burning desire to make a difference in the world. "You probably haven't been here in a while," Alex said, noticing how I was looking around with interest. "No, I haven't. A lot has changed," I replied, taking in the new buildings and renovated classrooms. "But at the same time, the atmosphere feels just the same. I remember how I felt when I was in your shoes. It was like the beginning of something big." Alex listened closely, and I could see the respect and interest in his eyes. As we reached the auditorium, I realized that my nervousness was morphing into anticipation. Stepping into the room, I noticed the students quietly chatting among themselves, some recognizing me. I figured a few of them might have read my articles or heard about cases from my practice. The lecture began. I talked about my experiences in the field, the challenges and hurdles that psychologists face in real-world practice. The students were attentive, asking questions, and it suddenly hit me how much I had missed this. The exchange of ideas, the vibrant energy that comes from engaging in a real dialogue. Alex sat in the front row, his eyes locked on me, hanging on every word. I started to feel that there was something more forming between us than just a professional connection. In his face, I saw a glimpse of the Jessica I used to be. After the lecture, several students came up to me, asking more questions and thanking me for the engaging material. Alex was the last to approach. "You were incredible," he said, smiling warmly. "I never realized psychology could be this fascinating." I thanked him, and he suggested we grab a coffee at a nearby cafe. I hesitated for a moment but agreed, feeling like the evening wasn't quite over yet. Something inside me was waking up, like a part of me that had been dormant for a long time, and I couldn't resist that feeling. After the lecture, Alex and I headed to a quaint little cafe close to the university. The place had a cozy vibe, with wooden tables and soft lighting that gave it a warm, inviting atmosphere. We chose a table by the window, which offered a beautiful view of the autumn park, blanketed in golden leaves. Alex ordered us both a cup of coffee, and the conversation that had started back in the lecture hall continued, but now in a more relaxed setting. He asked me with genuine curiosity about my work, how I handled tough cases and what kept me inspired in the profession. I answered his questions, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. Usually I avoided discussing my work outside the clinic, but with Alex it felt different. He listened so intently that it made me feel like everything I said really mattered. At some point, Alex steered the conversation toward more personal topics. "Jessica, what drew you to psychology? I've always thought that to work with people's emotions, you must have gone through something significant yourself." I smiled, thinking back to my college days. When I was your age, I wanted to help people. I believed that by understanding others' problems, I could better understand my own. But over time, I realized that psychology isn't just about helping others. It's also about constantly working on yourself. Alex nodded thoughtfully. "That must be tough. Always being in a state of self-reflection." "It is," I admitted. "But that's what helps us grow. We learn from our mistakes, we evolve. Though yes, it can become a heavy burden at times." As our conversation deepened, I realized I hadn't spoken like this with anyone in years. Mike never asked me these kinds of questions, and it hit me just how much I'd missed this kind of connection. Alex was young, full of hopes and ambitions, and his genuine interest in what I had to say made me feel valued and needed. At one point, the conversation turned more personal. Alex opened up about his complicated relationship with his parents and the pressure of living up to their expectations. I listened, and with every word he spoke, I saw more of my younger self in him, the person I used to be, filled with dreams and aspirations. When our conversation finally wound down, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I knew this wasn't just an ordinary chat, it was something more. Alex suggested meeting again, and without a second thought, I agreed. There was a spark inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A spark of interest, maybe even hope. I didn't know where this could lead, but I wasn't able to resist this new feeling. When I got home, Mike was in front of the TV as usual, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty about being late. Something new was stirring inside me, something I couldn't ignore. After that evening at the cafe, an unusual friendship began to blossom between Alex and me. We started exchanging messages regularly, sharing our thoughts, discussing books and articles, and talking about work and life in general. With each message, I felt that something more than just professional interest was growing between us. One day, Alex suggested we meet again. "Why don't we take a walk in the park after work?" he wrote in one of his texts. I stared at my phone for a long time before responding. Deep down, I knew our meetings were already moving beyond the realm of ordinary friendship, but there was something about his invitation that I just couldn't resist. In the end, I agreed. We met at the same park where we'd taken that first walk after the lecture. Alex looked just as relaxed and approachable as he had that day. He shared details about a new project he was working on at the university, and I talked about the patients I'd been consulting with recently. Our conversation flowed easily, but I could feel the tension between us building, as if an invisible thread was tightening, pulling our hearts closer with each step. Waves of emotions began to wash over me, feelings I thought I'd lost forever. As Alex talked about his dreams and future plans, I felt a strange sensation stirring inside me, like I was rediscovering a part of myself that craved life and adventure. After our walk, he suggested we stop by a small cafe on the corner. There was nothing particularly special about the place, just a regular cafe. But I knew it was a moment I'd never forget. We found a table in the corner, tucked away from prying eyes. Alex ordered coffee, and as I met his gaze, I felt my heart quicken. We chatted about everything and nothing all at once, and then at some point he reached out and touched my hand. It was the smallest gesture, but it ignited a storm inside me. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I realized I was standing on the brink of something forbidden. Yet I couldn't pull away. Inside, two voices battled, one urging me to leave immediately before it was too late, and the other, quieter but more compelling, whispering that I deserved this moment of happiness. Alex smiled, as if he could read my thoughts. "Jessica, I don't want this to end," he said softly, and I felt a tightness in my chest. I knew I was at a crossroads, about to make a choice that would change everything. That night, I got home later than usual. Mike was already asleep, and I slipped quietly into the bedroom, careful not to wake him. Lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts whirled around in my mind. I understood that with each step I took, I was sinking deeper into something dangerous and forbidden, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. These meetings with Alex had become more than just an escape from my routine. They were like a breath of fresh air, something I needed to survive. Our meetings continued, becoming more frequent and increasingly risky. We found excuses to see each other whenever we could. Sometimes it was brief walks after work, other times it was meetings in cafes or at his apartment near the university. Every time we were together, I felt a fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. However, with each passing day, I became more aware of the thin ice I was treading on. Mike started to notice the changes in my behavior. One evening, when I came home late again, he met me at the door, and I saw a mix of worry and suspicion in his eyes. "You've been staying late a lot lately. Is everything okay?" he asked, trying to mask his concern with a tone of indifference. I felt a knot of tension tighten in my stomach, realizing that the excuses I'd been giving Mike were starting to lose their credibility. "Yeah, just a lot of work. The patients need attention," I replied, hoping my voice sounded convincing. Mike nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied with my answer. His growing distrust settled in my thoughts like a cold wind that wouldn't let me rest. The next day, I met with Alex, but this time our conversation didn't come as easily as before. The guilt inside me was growing stronger. I saw the way Alex looked at me, his eyes filled with hope and longing, and it only intensified my internal struggle. I knew he wanted more, that our meetings meant something deeper to him than just casual companionship or a fleeting romance. "Jessica, have you ever thought about what comes next?" Alex asked as we sat on a bench in the park where we often strolled. His question took me by surprise. I wasn't sure how to respond because I was terrified of contemplating the future myself. I'd been avoiding that question like it was a poison that could destroy everything we had. "I don't know," I replied softly, feeling a tight knot forming inside me. I could tell him the truth, that I was terrified of losing both him and the feelings he had stirred within me, but at the same time I couldn't bear the thought of shattering my family. Alex leaned in closer, his voice gentle but persistent. I know there's more between us than just these meetings. I feel it, Jessica, and I know you do too. Those words cut through me like a blade. I knew he was right, but instead of responding, I just nodded silently, unable to put into words what was happening inside me. I couldn't admit that what had started as innocent conversations had now grown into something much larger and far more dangerous. That night, I returned home later than usual once again. Mike was sitting in the living room, his face filled with concern. He didn't say a word, but the tension in the air was palpable, hanging between us like a heavy cloud. I knew my lies would soon catch up with me, that I was teetering on the edge of destroying everything I had. But even then, I realized I couldn't bring myself to stop. My relationship with Alex began to take on a darker, more intense tone, and each of our meetings brought me not only joy but also the painful awareness that I was losing control. With every passing day, I sank deeper into a whirlpool of emotions that I couldn't control, casting a shadow over everything that had once been familiar in my life. As time went on, the tension between Mike and me became almost unbearable. I knew he could sense the growing distance between us, but I kept hiding the truth, sinking further into the secrecy of my meetings with Alex. Every time I looked at Mike, I saw something new in his eyes: distrust, suspicion, pain. It made me feel awful, but I couldn't bring myself to end things with Alex. Our meetings had become the only source of joy in my life. One evening, after returning home from yet another meeting with Alex, I found Mike sitting alone in the dark kitchen. His silhouette was barely visible in the dim light from the window, and the sight of him made me tense up immediately. I felt the blood run cold in my veins. "Where have you been?" His voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it. "At work," I replied, trying to sound calm, but my heart was pounding wildly in my chest. Mike slowly stood up and walked toward me. In his hand was my phone. "I saw your messages, Jessica," he said, and those words hit me like a slap across the face. I realized it was over. The secret I'd been desperately trying to keep had been uncovered. I stood there, unable to come up with any excuses or explanations. The words caught in my throat, and the horror was plain in my eyes. "Who is he?" Mike continued, his voice trembling with barely restrained anger. I stayed silent, not knowing what to say. Inside, a storm of emotions raged: guilt, fear, shame. I knew I had destroyed everything we had, and I had no idea how to make things right. "Jessica, answer me." Mike's voice rose and I flinched. "His name is Alex," I finally whispered, feeling the tears begin to spill down my cheeks. "He's a student." Mike fell silent for a moment, processing what he had just heard. His face hardened, and I could see him struggling to maintain control. "A student? You cheated on me with a student." His voice dripped with contempt. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. "It's not what you think," I started, but he cut me off sharply. "Not what I think." He let out a bitter laugh. "Do you really think that makes this any better? You betrayed me, Jessica. You destroyed everything we had." In that moment, I knew that no words could ever repair the damage I'd done. I looked at the man I had spent 20 years of my life with, and all I could see was the pain and disappointment etched deeply on his face. It was unbearable. Mike didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door so hard that the walls seemed to shake. I stood there in the empty kitchen, feeling as if my entire world was collapsing around me. In that instant, I realized that I had lost not just Mike, but also a part of myself. My life, my dreams. Everything had turned to ashes because of one reckless decision. I didn't know where he had gone or when he would return, but I understood one thing: things would never be the same again. I was left alone in the cold, silent house, lost in my thoughts and the realization that I would have to face the full consequences of my actions. The next morning, Mike still hadn't returned. I spent the night in a state of anxious despair, not knowing where he was or what might have happened to him. Every minute felt like an eternity, and all I could think about was how I had destroyed my life. I tried calling him, sent messages, but there was no response. With a deep emptiness in my soul and a heavy heart, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The entire day dragged on in agonizing anticipation as I wrestled with thoughts about my future. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept circling back to Mike and the terrible mistake I'd made. As I replayed our years together in my mind, I couldn't understand how I had managed to throw it all away so easily for that fleeting moment of happiness with Alex. Alex sensed that something was wrong. He sent me several messages asking what had happened, but I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say to him. Inside, a chasm was opening up. On one side were my feelings for him, and on the other was the harsh realization that this relationship had led me to ruin. I knew I couldn't continue being with him the way I had before. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Late in the evening, Mike finally returned home. I heard the front door slam and I tensed up, waiting to see what would happen next. He walked into the living room without even glancing at me and started packing his things. I approached him, but he remained silent. His silence was more painful than any words could have been. "Mike, please, let's talk," I pleaded, feeling the tears start to well up again. "I made a mistake, I know, but we can try to fix this." Mike paused and looked at me, his face completely devoid of emotion. "Jessica, there's nothing left to fix," he said coldly. "You made your choice, and I can't be part of this lie anymore." I searched for the right words to stop him, but everything I could think of felt hollow and pointless. Mike kept packing his things, and in that moment I realized he had made up his mind. Nothing I could say or do would bring back what we had lost. When he had finished gathering his belongings, Mike paused at the door and turned to face me one last time. "Jessica, I thought we'd spend our whole lives together, but I guess I was wrong. Goodbye." Those words hit me like a death sentence. He walked out, leaving me alone in our big, now eerily empty house. I stood there trying to comprehend that this was truly the end of our life together, our dreams and our future. That night, it finally sank in that I would have to start over, but this time I'd be doing it alone. The next day, I decided to meet with Alex. I knew I needed to close this chapter of my life as well. When I arrived, he greeted me with a smile, but his expression quickly changed when he saw how distressed I was. "Jessica, what's going on?" he asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "Alex, I can't do this anymore," I began, barely holding back tears. "What's happened between us has destroyed everything I had. I've lost Mike, I've lost my family, and I can't keep going like this." Alex tried to reassure me, saying we could face it together, but I could see that his words were losing their strength. There was a void inside me that nothing could fill. I couldn't pretend any longer that our relationship didn't come with consequences. "Alex, you need to live your life. You're young, and you have so many opportunities ahead of you. As for me, I made a mistake and now I have to live with it," I said, feeling the weight of every word. He stayed silent, understanding that my words marked the end. Our story, once so vibrant and full of emotion, had come to an abrupt and painful conclusion. We both knew it was inevitable, but it still hurt. I walked away from him, leaving behind that part of my life that had brought me so much joy and at the same time so much sorrow. Now I had to start over, but this time I would do it alone.